Your family relationships are in your mind. When you close your eyes, your family disappears. Where do they go? Nowhere, but doing this exercise helps you to recognize that your relatives exist as thoughts in your mind. If the focus of your inner dialogue about your family members is on what they're doing that's wrong, then that's precisely how your relationship with them will be experienced. If your inner speech centers on what's annoying about them, then that's what you'll notice. As much as you're inclined to blame them for your annoyance, it's yours, and it's coming from your thoughts. If you make a decision to put your inner attention, your life energy, on something quite different, your relationship will change. In your thoughts, where your family relationships exist, you'll no longer be annoyed, angry, hurt, or depressed. If in your mind you're thinking, my intention is to be authentic and peaceful with this relative, then that's what you'll experience, even if that relative continues to be exactly the way he or she has always been. Changing your mind is really changing your relationships. Being authentic and peaceful with your relatives is only a thought away. You can learn to change your thoughts by intending to create authentic and peaceful feelings within yourself. No one is capable of making you upset without your consent, and you've given your consent too frequently in the past. When you begin practicing the intention to be authentic and peaceful, you withdraw your consent to be in the lower energy. You connect to peace itself and decide to bring peace to your relatives, thereby immediately gaining the power to change the energy of family gatherings. Prior to my waking up to the power of intention, family visits were events that caused me consternation because of the attitudes and behavior of some of my wife's relatives. I'd prepare for a Sunday afternoon family visit by getting anxious and upset over what I anticipated to be a fretful, lousy experience, and I seldom disappointed myself. I'd focus my thoughts on what I didn't like, and I defined my relationship with my in-laws in this manner. Gradually, as I began to understand the power of intention and left my ego behind, I substituted kindness, receptivity, love, and even beauty for my former annoyed and angry assessments. Before family get-togethers, I'd remind myself that I'm what I choose to be in any and all circumstances, and I chose to be authentically peaceful and have a good time. In response to something that used to annoy me, I'd now say to my mother-in-law in a loving way, "I never thought of it that way. Tell me more." In response to what I previously considered to be an ignorant comment, I'd respond, "That's an interesting point of view. When did you first learn about this?" In other words, I was bringing my own intention to be in a state of peace to this encounter and was refusing to judge them. The most amazing things began to happen. I started looking forward to having these family members at our home. I began to see them as much more enlightened than I'd previously thought. I actually enjoyed our times together, and every time something came up that I'd found annoying in the past, I'd overlook it and respond with love and kindness instead. At an earlier stage of my life, expressions of racial or religious prejudice were a stimulus for my anger and resentment. Now I'd quietly respond with a kind and gentle reminder of my own opinions and simply let the matter drop. Over the years, I found that not only did the racial and religious slurs diminish to zero, but I noticed that my in-laws were expressing tolerance and even love toward minorities, as well as those who practiced religions different from their own. Although my primary intention was to stay in a state of peace, I discovered that by not joining in the low energies of my in-laws, not only was the entire family more peaceful, but many enjoyable and even enlightening conversations developed. I had as much to learn from my in-laws as I had to teach. Even when I disagreed vehemently with a judgment directed at me, if I remembered my intention to have a peaceful relationship with them, I was able to do just that. No longer did I think about what I disliked, or what was missing, or what always had been. I stayed focused on making these gatherings fun, loving, and most important to me, peaceful. And what you have to learn to do is develop an inner candle flame that never flickers, though the worst goes before you. You must know that all of the problems, all the difficulties, all the victimization that you may feel in your life, all of the strings that are being pulled by somebody else, are really things that you have allowed up until now. And now you make a recommitment to your own excellence, or your own non-victim status, if you will. Some of the categories of where people dichotomize and judge are good and bad. They try to put the whole world into what is good and what is bad based upon some perception I have. And those things that don't fit into it,
the way I think they ought to be are bad, and all the things that I agree with are good. And so you find yourself going through your whole life running into half of the people or more who are doing things in a different way than you do, and judging them all to be bad, and therefore being their victim, because they now own your emotional strings. Remember, being a victim isn't necessarily a physical thing. In fact, that's very seldom the thing, because we have laws to protect each other from being physically abused by each other. It isn't as if somebody's putting you into a jail, into a cell. It is the victimization is what you experience in your mind and in your emotions. And this comes from judging, from categorizing, from compartmentalizing people and putting them into the compartments, and then when they don't fit with the behavior that you think they should exhibit, you find yourself upset and worked up and angry and hurt. It's really important to develop a quiet mind when it comes to all of this. A quiet mind is a mind that is at peace, a mind that doesn't judge. Just because you label somebody else to be something obnoxious or nasty or hurtful doesn't mean that that's what they are. That's just your judgment, and that's your definition of yourself as someone who needs to judge. So learning not to judge and unclogging your mind, if you will, of judgments and negativity, and quieting your mind.
Whenever I speak, I always repeat an affirmation from A Course in Miracles. And this affirmation goes like this. It says, if you knew, it doesn't say if you believed, it says if you knew, a knowing means an absence of doubt. If you knew who walked beside you at all times on this path that you have chosen, you could never experience fear or doubt again. And I remind myself of that as I take the microphone. And if I'm going to speak for a weekend or 20 minutes or anything in between, I always remind myself that I'm not alone, that I am connected to something that I am a part of. And it doesn't matter what you call it. As Alan Watts said, you can't get wet from the word water. Whether you call it water or aqua or anything in between, Vaser, it's not what you call it that will make you wet. It's the substance of it. So whether you call this God or soul or spirit or consciousness is of no consequence. And it's shifting into that knowing. I've often said that when Jesus would approach a leper, he wouldn't go up to the leper and say, you know, we haven't been having a whole lot of success here with leprosy lately. It's really running rampant here. There are noses falling off, there are fingers in the ditch. This is not a pleasant sight. But I've got some advice, and I've got some herbs. And if you listen to my advice and you take these herbs, you have a 30% chance of surviving over the next 5 years. He would never say that. He said, walk. You are healed. Rise. And healing would take place. And even the least among you can do all that I have done, and even greater things. And it's a very intriguing kind of idea. This notion of being in a state of mind in which you can have a knowing that is so profound that doubt can never enter into it. Now you have this knowing. I remember when I first read the works of the Buddha, he said the first and most significant thing for any of us to know is to come to know something that cannot be destroyed by death. The most important thing that you can learn in your life, said the Buddha, is to come to know something that cannot be destroyed by death. Jung put it this way. He said the telling question of your life is your relationship to the infinite. If you have one, you are on a path of higher awareness. If you don't, you're not. Do you have a sense of the infinite? When Lao Tzu was asked the question, "What is real, Master? What is real?" by his devotees and students. And Lao Tzu, in the 6th century before Christ in China, was considered to be God in a human form. He had that same ability, the gift of fish and loaves. He was the founder and the author of the Tao and Taoism, but he would perform miracles wherever he would go. Lights would come from him. He was considered to be one of those light beings 600 years before the birth of Christ. And when they said, "What is real, Master? What is real?" he said, "That is real which never changes." Now you look at yourself and you try to find and define something about yourself that meets that criteria, that meets that definition. What about you has never changed? Is it your body? Certainly not mine. I hold a hair up on the pillow in the morning. I say to my wife, "Honey, this is the metaphysical question. Final answer." What held it in yesterday? We have no idea. I've had this experience several million times. Right? So the part of us that has never changed isn't even what we're aware of. It isn't even our mind. Our mind is changing all the time. The part of us that has never changed is called awareness. Awareness. Not what you're aware of, but awareness. And awareness is the unchangeable. It's the part of us that when we begin to live from there, we begin to make dramatic shifts in our consciousness and in our lives. When people ask me what my view of God is, I always say I always see God as the ocean, and I see myself as a glass. And if I take this glass and I dip it into the ocean, I say, what do I have here? What I have here is a glass of God. It's not as big, and it's not as strong, but it's still God. And just like a wave on the ocean is what the ocean is doing, we are all what God is doing.
I read an interesting article this summer on the astronauts and their spiritual experiences of having gone into the universe outside of the Earth plane and looking back. And one of the astronauts was quoted as saying that when he looked back at the Earth, this blue, blue planet, like what our sky is what you see from out there, and you look then in one direction, you see Earth and this tiny, tiny little dot, this blue dot, and then you look out the other way and you see an infinite number of worlds, and you look all around you and you're surrounded by this infinity of this universe. He said, I realized that there's an intelligence to this system, that it is an intelligent system that is all absolutely, and he's like, it happened for him in a moment, this instantaneous kind of realization that there's an intelligence to all of this, that the intelligence that is a part of the universe, or that allows the universe to work. Again, the label isn't important. He said it made him realize that it's all working absolutely perfectly and that it's all on purpose, and that all of it has a purpose. Well, I have discovered that most people really don't believe they have a purpose, or they spend a big hunk of their life trying to discover their purpose, or they will find so many events transpiring in their life that seem to be inconsistent with any kind of grander purpose that it's impossible for them to accept that this is anything but just one grand accident. I know it's not an accident. And once you discover your purpose, and the way that you discover that, that's that secret source. So that's the secret force, if you will, that is within you at all times. This invisible, silent, empty space that is a part of every one of us. That is what allows us to be. My own development is probably just as appropriate to talk about here as anything on these tapes, because I often think to myself that if I can do it, coming from where I came from, that anybody can. I come from impoverished beginnings. a child who never had an allowance in his life, didn't even know what it was. When other kids would talk about my allowance, I didn't know anything about that because there just wasn't anybody there to give me an allowance. The people that were there didn't have it to give away anyway. So it was very, very early in my own development that I learned the secrets of being my own person and my own strengths. That internal kind of knowingness isn't something I believe that I learned somewhere along the line through some magical, instantaneous kind of revelation. It was something that I believe I showed up with here. And that I think that every single person has that capacity for, but they don't seem to choose it. And it's like knowing that you have that inner strength, and knowing that nobody else can make you unhappy, and knowing that no circumstance out there is too big for you to handle, and knowing that when you go off to sleep at night, no matter what has happened all day long, that you still only have yourself to live with, and that very private inner world wherein you talk to yourself, and we call this self-talk or whatever you want to call it. All of us do this all the time. We have these conversations with ourselves, which is really two people. We are having a conversation with ourselves, and we do this all the time. And what the quality of those conversations are, how you process the daily events of your life and all of the things that are happening to you, is really the secret source of enormous strength. And then, as you get a little older, you begin to put a label on that. You begin to identify that in some way as something that is more than just an intuitive way of processing the world in a positive direction. It's more than that. You begin to realize that you're not alone. And a lot of people believe that they are alone in the world, and that this inner world of thought, this inner world of power and of inner conviction, or whatever you want to call it, is something that you can rely on, but it's not just something that you're alone with. And as I got older and more experienced in it, I began to see that I believe I have someone with me, or guides with me, or some kind of help available to me at all times. And it's just really a question of whether you decide to believe it or don't believe it. It isn't anything we can put to a double-blind study and have scientists come up and say, no, this doesn't exist or that doesn't exist. It's just a knowing. And when you have that guide, and almost all of the great spiritual masters and the great religions and so on, when you begin to study them, as I have done in more recent years in my life and written books about them and produced tapes about them, you begin to discover that the greatest thinkers, the great contributors, all have this sort of inner knowing that they're not alone, that help is available to you. Help in the form of whatever you want to call it isn't even relevant. If you want to call it God, or you want to call it Buddha, or you want to call it Christ, or you want to call it spirituality or consciousness or whatever, it isn't the label that's important. It's the experience of it. And it's the knowing that it's there, and knowing that you can go there at any time.